Coming up on today's show, Heather Claus has lived an atypical life. She's hitchhiked across the country. She's traveled and worked in a carnival for a season. She's roamed New York City with street people. She's explored and taught alternative lifestyles. She's non-monogamous. She's ADHD. She's also left an abusive marriage and chose to create the love she wanted. Now, more than 15 years later, she's living her passion. She writes books about love, sex, and romance for people of all genders, relationship statuses, orientations, and more. She teaches workshops and coaches amazing people to create lives full of love and connection. She's a fan of wonderful people enjoying love, sex, and romance in happy and functional lives, whatever that might look like from human to human. Welcome to Loving Without Boundaries, where we hear inspiring stories, share actionable advice, and talk about the challenges and the joys of ethical non-monogamy and polyamory. I'm your host, Kitty Chambliss. Welcome back to Loving Without Boundaries, where I am really excited to be here with Heather Claus, who we've just been having a lovely conversation before we started recording, and I'm excited to have a beautiful interview with you. So welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me. Super excited about this.
I am too. So, and I loved reading your bio, but I'd love to give you an opportunity to introduce yourself in your own words to our listeners.
Sure. Hi, I'm Heather. My friends call me Nookie. My pronouns are she, her. I have been interested in and researching love, sex, and romance for about 17 years now after I got out of an abusive relationship. And I am maybe a bit unusual. I've lived an atypical life. I've hitchhiked across the country. I've traveled and worked in the carnival. I've roamed New York City barefoot with street people. I've explored and taught alternative lifestyles, including non-monogamy and kink. I'm ADHD and EDD. I've also spent a lot of time in like the online seduction and pickup artist communities, and I have built and moderated and run dating apps and sites of all types. And now I write books about love, sex, and romance with people of all genders, sexual orientations, and more.
That is quite a fascinating life and journey. Can I ask just some random questions?
Absolutely.
About some of that? And then I'll kind of go back into my normal way that I move through the interview. I'm curious, how old were you when you hitchhiked across the country? When was that?
I was 15 at the time. I dropped out of high school and I took off hitchhiking across the country, just, looking for some adventure. And that's how I ended up connecting with the carnival. And I turned 16 in the carnival.
And what were you doing in the carnival? I'm fascinated.
Set up and tear down of the rides. And I ran the games quite a bit because having a young lady running the games meant boys hung out and spent money on the games.
Yeah, that's awesome. How interesting. That's fascinating. And and I'm curious. And what when you were hitchhiking, like, do people still hitchhike? I guess they do.
I mean, well, I'm 50 now. So this was 35 years ago. I would say it was more common then, although it was definitely falling out of fashion. I did have a friend of mine that went with me on that first part of it. Okay. So, we were traveling in a pair. It was a little safer than it might have seemed.
Yeah, it's fascinating because I remember being a young girl. I'm 54. So I remember being a young girl and seeing hitchhikers, so that was probably the 70s, I guess.
Yeah.
Maybe even the early 80s. But yeah, you don't see it very much anymore. And now when you see it, it's very weird,
It is definitely different now.
Yeah, but I think that's really cool that you did that and obviously lived to tell the tale. So, and you identify yourself as non-monogamous at this point as well. Is that right?
Yeah, I am non-monogamous, polyamorous, and mono or singularly romantic. So I don't have that like sort of in love or twitterpation or, you know, butterflies in the stomach with more than one person at a time. It's not that I haven't tried. It just doesn't happen for me that way. I don't get NRE in the way that other people do. But I do create strong pair bonds over time with multiple people.
Mm-hmm. Very cool. I don't think I've heard that before. Monoromantic. So meaning that you might feel loving feelings for only one person at a time. Is that right?
I feel like the love is there. Like, you know, that when we talk about like old relationship energy or evolved relationship energy, that happens to me, right? Like I become very, you know, clearly enmeshed in a like family and pair bonded way with people who fit my life for a long time, either sexually or not. But that like sort of like that rush of like, I want to, you know, leave them cute notes and I think about them all the time. Like that actually never, I guess, officially leaves me. I've been that way for over a decade in my current relationship. And, you know, I feel like in my brain, there's just not room for too much of that kind of like, it's like ADHD love. Right. Like, so I can only do that with one person on top of my regular ADHD. I can't maintain that in any sort of significant fashion with anyone else. It just doesn't happen.
Well, I love the awareness that you have around that. And it's another new term I haven't heard, old relationship energy. I love that.
Yeah, it's like the smoother part, you know, you're companions, you're comfortable with each other. You've had your major, you know, fracas, you've gotten through like all the like weirdnesses, you know how each other works, right? Like I love that part of life with all manner of humans.
I love that term. I'm totally stealing that. It's funny. I've never heard it before, which is silly since we've all heard of, I'm sure people in this community have all heard of new relationship energy. So one thing I love to ask, and it sounds like you've had just an amazing, interesting life. Was there like a moment when you were growing up when you knew that you weren't necessarily going to be having like the white picket fence, the kind of traditional monogamous relationship, and maybe you were going to be a little bit different, coloring outside of the lines of that? Was there either one kind of light bulb moment or maybe a series of moments for you?
I think when I was younger, I was just so part of my diagnoses, in addition to ADHD, is empathy deficit disorder. So I don't have like the same kind of empathy feels that a lot of people do. I don't feel other people's feelings. So I've always been a little different and I've always known that. I don't think I ever really kind of sat myself down and said, you know, you're going to be radically different for your entire life, right? Because I think I wanted to fit in a lot of ways, but also, as you've heard, I was busy doing radically me things for a good portion of my life. But I did get married, and for some reason, and I think that maybe a lot of people will actually relate to this, so I'll share it.
Sure.
When I got married, even though prior to that, I was very like open and free and like loving multiple people and dating multiple people or whatever. When I got married, I was not prepared for a switch that flipped in my brain and changed what I thought and expected out of life. And I became a wife. I didn't mean to become a wife. Like I was not consciously aware of it. But even though my parents were not traditional types of people, I somehow, like through society and my peers and probably through my partner at the time, got this idea of what marriage should be. And, you know, forever was one of those things. And, so yeah, it ended up being a real struggle we were not prepared. You know, we were young. We were not prepared with a mismatch in values and expectations and whatever. And, he had some mental challenges and ended up with an addiction. And, I was there, through thick and thin, and it became, emotionally abusive with eventually threats of physical abuse, which is when I left. And, I got out of that marriage, and I spent a full year, like, just digging back through it. Like, I read books. I read about 500 relationship books that year. And that was also like the big internet boom of online dating and stuff. So there were a lot of like people online writing, like The World's Most Romantic Man was like big that time. So I read everything he put together. I like joined the pickup artist community, and I read what they were saying. Like, there was a whole thing. I even joined twice. I joined as myself, and I joined as a guy, so I could see like both perspectives. That was like a whole thing.
Wow.
And so I was like digging down into like what went wrong, right? Because I spent 15 years with this man. What went wrong? And I was abused. I was taking, that was like his issues were his issues. I was not taking responsibility for that. I did, however, want to look at that relationship and figure out how I enabled it over time. Like, when did I not stop it when I should have? Multiple times, right? Not to blame myself or to take, but to take ownership of, I didn't have to let that continue, right? So that moving forward into my future, I wouldn't. So I spent a year doing almost zero outside of the home socializing. I had dogs that I walked, I had work that I did, and I dug into like everything I could. And I realized that like I was not cut out to be that traditional person. Like that was a big realization amongst many, many other things. Like, wow, shit, I didn't have much in the way of boundaries, did I? Oopsies. Because for some reason I felt like once you get married, the person loves you. That's the person that loves you most in the world, right? What do you need boundaries for? Because they only want what's best for you. So, and then, after about a year of that, I, sort of started going online, and I started really getting more involved in online communities like Literotica and alt.net and so on and so forth. And I joined online dating sites. And that is when I ended up, over the course of a year, I didn't intend to do this, but over the course of a year, I went on 127 first dates. And I did not meet my forever partner on any of them. But what I did do is I learned a lot about what I did and didn't want, a lot about how people present themselves online and then show up in person. I became a moderator on a couple of different adult sites, including dating sites, and like started to see how people are really sneaky behind the scenes and the crap they pull. And, so I knew definitely by that point that I was not, not your average bear.
Totally fascinating. I'm just riveted by your whole story there. So you mentioned that you got married young. Were you in like your early 20s?
I was 23. My mother had actually just passed away, and I was writing my first book, and I sort of describe it as he and I was stressed. Obviously, my mom had just passed away. We were in, my childhood home. Well, my grandparents, but where I used to spend a lot of time during the summer. And, we got into a big fight, and at the end of the fight, he proposed. And, I described it jokingly throughout our relationship that it was either marry him or be done. And I guess at the time, I feel like if I had not lost my mother so recently, I would have been done. But that was definitely, stressful for me. I'm an only child. My mother and father were not together at that point. I was left at 23 years old to deal with everything my mother had left behind. And, she was not organized. Wow. And so, it's entirely possible that I married him simply to have a sense of belonging, right? It's not that I didn't love him. Obviously I did. And he loved me in the best ways he could. I'm never, ever going to deny any of that. And I hope that most people going into relationships don't ever deny those sorts of things for themselves, because we can love each other and still be awful, just really awful to each other.
Totally. Yeah. That totally can happen. Yeah.
But it just, it was not what I would consider, an ideal, decision. And, but we were fairly happy for the first, 5 to 7 years. And then, his mental health started deteriorating and his addiction started, and it became a thing.
Wow. And so, in the context of your marriage, were you generally monogamous for those 15 years?
Well, we weren't supposed to be.
Okay. That was part of your agreements, you mean, in the beginning?
So we originally met when, I was in New York City. I was exploring the, kind of life to be had as a single woman there. I had found the vault in the meatpacking district and enjoyed, having kinky guys ask me if they could lick my boots or whatever. I was like, hey, yeah, this is fun. Sure. Go ahead. I like this adoration. This is nice. So when we met, it was very open and exploring and so on and so forth. By the time we got married, we'd settled into, I was starting a business. I was an entrepreneur. I was doing my thing. I was very busy. I was also do whatever you got to do to make you happy, whatever. I don't think he ever took advantage of that at that point. We certainly didn't. I didn't hear anything about it, and he didn't seem to have a lot of time. But after we got married, the jealousy and possessiveness from his side started really asserting itself. And I had sort of gone into this thinking, well, it was sort of natural to be, this open and loving person. I didn't really care about how other people did things. But then once I was married and this sort of came out of him, I didn't have time to fight with him. I was in the middle of building a business. I didn't have time to go searching for people to date or anything like that anyway. I was traveling across the country. I was teaching. I was building a sewing and fashion design education, empire online. I just did not have the energy or the resources to do anything outside of the relationship. By the end of the relationship, it got to the point where he was accusing me of cheating on him with any person I flirted with or whatever. And, so I realized that was the opposite of the intention going in. And I think a big part of it is once he got married, maybe the same thing happened in his head and the switch flipped and that whole Madonna whore syndrome thing sort of kicked in. And he was also raised Catholic. So the Catholic guilt, I think, might have started really, poking at him in a way that neither of us were equipped to handle, these deeply held internal beliefs about what is right and good and whatever in a marriage, because we were young and emotionally immature. And I was busy doing shit and he was busy, being a physical trainer and then ultimately supporting me in my business and then ultimately not doing squat. But, it just, the frog was boiled very slowly into something that was completely untenable.
Wow. Well, I just really honor you for, first of all, vulnerably sharing your story and your experiences, because I'm sure it's very relatable and helpful to our listeners to hear that. And also the journey that you took yourself on after that of reading 500 books. That's fascinating. I really think that's beautiful that you were, again, doing it not from a place of beating yourself up, but from a place of curiosity. What just happened? Let me figure out where the the wheels ran off the cart there, so that hopefully maybe I don't repeat that in the future. And it sounds like you just this beautiful self-empowering discovery path. Is that how you would describe it?
I mean, looking back on it, sure. During that time, it was more I talk about the threat drive brain pattern where, we've got our threat brain, we got our drive brain, and our safe brain. Our safe brain is like a home, right? When you're just feeling super secure and comfortable. Drive brain are all the things: go, do, compete, get, whatever. Threat brain is danger, Will Robinson, right? So I had just come out of something and I was looking forward into my future thinking, well, there's danger if I don't figure out how to make this not happen again, right? Like I could clearly see that's a dangerous path. So I immediately went into drive brain, which is honestly not the ideal. I should have focused a little bit more on safe brain, but I immediately went to drive brain and if I can just fill myself with so much information, if I can just learn from everybody that's out there, some of this is going to protect me moving forward into the future.
That's fascinating. And it sounds like you learned a lot about yourself. That also, would you say that was partly a trajectory that kind of sent you down the path that you are now, where you're writing books and you did the research with love, sex, and romance? Was that kind of a turning point for you?
I would say it was the beginning of a turning point. One of the things I had with my ex-husband is he would constantly tell me that my expectations, my ideas about relationships were too much. They were unrealistic. They were not, nobody could live up to that. So I ended up in another relationship with a nice person who was almost exactly the opposite of my husband. My husband was fiery and big and larger than life and just, everybody loved him and he's super extroverted and whatever. My new guy was quiet and calm. He'd been in a gang when he was younger. He stepped out. He hated violence. He doesn't like to argue. Everything was different. And after a while, and he also wanted, this non-monogamy kink sort of exploration. And it ended up in approximately the same way. He was very possessive and he was very, but I saw this happening sooner. He also felt like my relationship expectations were too much and nobody could ever live up to that. So I broke up with him, much sooner. We were together about 5 years. And when I broke up with him, I still loved him deeply. It was heart-wrenching to break up with him, but I realized that we did not want the same things out of life. And that was okay, right? It hurt, but it was okay. And, both of them actually were still open to the open, but for them, right? They were still willing to talk about it. But every time they even thought about me, just being friendly with somebody, it got very stressful. So, and again, your expectations are too much. Nobody's going to live up to what you want. All of this. And I was beginning to wonder, maybe I'm wrong. Maybe I can't have what I'm looking for. 'Cause this is, I had 15 years with one, 20 with the other. I was 34 at the time, or 34 at the time of the end of the first one. And then, almost 40 at the end of the second one. That is half of my life that I have just spent on what? Failure. Yes. And also there was a lot of learning involved. It made me who I am. So I'm not knocking it. But at the time, you get out of your second long-term relationship that is, made up, 50% of your life. And you look at the pattern, you're like, well, we started this way and everything seemed hunky dory. And then we ended this way. And I'm like,
Yeah.
This could be a message from the universe. I don't know. And then it was just, maybe a month and a half after, because when I broke up with him, I had to send him back to where he was from. So the move out process was a several month process, which was, again, really heartbreaking because he didn't want to go. right? He thought we
Right.
could work it out. And I was like, we cannot, and so I actually, at some point, I've got a book that I'm working on, called Breaking Up is Hard to Do. That's talking about like how to either break up or be broken up, as compassionately and healthily as possible. There's like a whole thing that went on there that I had to like learn and research and whatever. But about a month and a half after like he did leave, about 5 months maybe after we'd fully broken up, I met the most amazing human I've ever known in my entire life.
Wow. And is that who you're with now?
That is.
That's
yeah.
amazing. And so in that relationship, I'm curious, is there are you not receiving the message that your expectations are too much? And,
my expectations were nowhere near what they should have been. Like I could not.
So your standards were like not high enough. Yeah.
Not high enough. Like, yeah, I could not have even. So I've one of the things that I've noticed is like if you look at like the 4 levels of competence, right? You've got level 1 is I don't know what I don't know, right? Unconscious incompetence. Level 2 is conscious incompetence. I know what I don't know, right? So that there's a bunch of stuff out there that like you haven't yet gotten to, right? Like that's where I was after these like 2 relationships. And that's what I was digging through. Like I was really trying to like figure out what I didn't know and how to know it. Level 3 is conscious competence. You are good at it when you are consciously focusing on it, right? And then, level 4 is unconscious competence. It's just a part of who you are, right? Instead of doing the things, you're the person who does the things. And when I met my partner, I was definitely in, conscious incompetence, but I was like, okay, like I've screwed up 20 years of my life, but I really like this guy. Like I don't want to screw this up. And not wanting to screw things up can also be a trap. So I have to set standards moving forward. And if he does not meet those standards, I cannot love him the way that I need to love him, right? Like I have to like let that go. So I kind of just laid it all on the table and was like, I want it all. I want honesty. I want openness. I want us to be able to share our fantasies, our wants, our desires, everything, like period, end of story, like nothing hidden. And, it kind of got this like deer in the headlights look. And, I think he agreed just because like he had the hots for me, but, yeah, somehow we managed to make that happen and more. Like there's, in level 1, maybe you can imagine level 2. In level 2, maybe you can imagine level 3. And then when you're in level 3, you can aspire to level 4, right? Like, so I had no idea, like the types of, depth and intimacy and just, lack of fighting and, calm and peace and self, worth and assurance and, a feeling of just being loved and desired.
Wow.
And, whatever it was. I couldn't imagine it until we started to build towards that and we gained that sort of momentum.
That's fascinating. So, and I'm curious, so that's the person that you've been with for 10 years. Do the 2 of you live together, if I can ask?
Yeah.
Nice. And you mentioned that you're monoromantic. So are you kind of like monoromantic with that individual, but non-monogamous, meaning like you can have some sexy fun, if you wanted to, or how does that work?
I can have sexy fun. I can have, long-term dating partners, whatever. I mean, we both can. We're both the goal in our relationship is really to be able to fully explore and realize our potential as human beings, whatever that looks like. And sure, that can be challenging to support and uphold sometimes because, sometimes you just don't see it coming. But that's the primary goal. And whatever that looks like, we are both kinky. We travel to events around the country. I teach at events around the country. So there's a lot that we've had the opportunity to really dig into and explore together and with others.
That's amazing. That's so awesome. Super inspiring, especially to hear how you started out in a marriage that eventually became abusive, and you were able to pull yourself out of that, learn, see yourself in another relationship. And, instead of, 3 times as long, it took you much shorter amount of time to realize, this isn't quite going to work out either. And you pulled the ripcord, which takes a lot of guts. So then see where you are now. That's super, super inspiring. One thing I'd love to go back to, just because I'm completely curious about it, when you said that you went into the kind of like the online seduction pickup communities and all of that, and you went in as a woman and then also as a man. I made a note to come back to that because I think that's fascinating. What did you learn from going in first as a woman and then later as a man into those communities that intrigued you?
Oh my goodness. It's crazy. Like these days, and this is, as a writer about relationships and as a coach, I was just talking, last month with somebody who I really respect, who does copywriting and marketing and stuff. And he was mentoring me through what is my identity? Sort of who am I as a superhero? And more importantly, what are the villains that I fight? And pickup artists and the people who use seduction and romantic behaviors in order to get what they want out of people. Those are some of my villains, right? And the challenge is that this is not just men, right? There are female pickup artists as well. But it's also the overarching theme of manipulation and trying to, and you see this on Cosmo, make them do X, Y, Z, right? In order to fit into whatever relationship, and this is my favorite, is when it's turned around, and you see this a lot online in relationship coaching, be in your feminine, right? So that he can be in his masculine. And I'm well, if you can't be masculine simply because I exist in your life, the problem is not me. Just hear me out. And, so what I really learned from those communities is that people, in that case, specifically men most often, but people in general, will spend a lot of time learning how to manipulate and trick other people into relationships, thinking that this is perfectly okay because, especially from a woman's standpoint, of what a lot of women teach is, how to manipulate your husband or your boyfriend or whatever into being the right man, right? And a lot of that was done in the pickup artist community from the perspective of, here is how you seek out insecure and what they call LSE or low self-esteem women and manipulate them to get sex from them and then leave them before they realize what a dirtbag you are. And LSE women are not necessarily what you would consider the traditionally undesirable women. It can also be women that are super hot and have that little kernel of insecurity that you find and you stick your knife in and you start opening it up more and more and more through these particular behaviors.
Wow.
And then I also learned that there are some guys that were in that community who got fairly disgusted with it and started creating information about these men who had tried all of that. And maybe they succeeded, maybe they hadn't, but for men who really wanted to create like lasting, meaningful relationships. And some of the most like famous of the pickup artists have since like turned themselves around and become loving, devoted family men. One of them wrote the foreword for one of my books.
Oh, wow.
And I even did some ghostwriting for some of those people because they wanted like a femme perspective and they wanted to work together to create, what could be a strong, powerful, sexually charged relationship that satisfied, both of the people in that. So I worked with, some of those people and I stayed in contact with, many of them. Like I got the opportunity to like travel to Thailand and go to a seminar on sexual hypnosis and power exchange type training. And so it really became a fascinating part of my life because the contrast between how I was treated as a woman in that community, a token, somebody who kind of bought into the idea of sexuality and owning your power and so on and so forth. And then as a man in that community who bought products and tried to, become and ask questions, the differences between what I saw as each of those people online. I mean, one of those people was me. It was Nookie. And then the other person was, a character that I created to dig deeper into, men's only forums and how men talk to each other about me when I was not there online.
Wow.
And, so on and so forth. So it was completely fascinating. And of course, at the same time, I was also in other forums like, Literotica in the chat groups there. And I was, moderating, some various like dating sites and so on and so forth. So I got to learn a lot about like how people do this mating game. And frankly, just between you and I, apparently everybody else who's listening to this, 99.9% of what we do is entirely the opposite of what we need to be doing in relationships as a culture, right? And even though many of us are, I'm gonna put this in air quotes, woker than others, we still get caught up and hung up on these like internalized beliefs about how we are supposed to be. And those trip us up and we hurt each other like so many ways as a result.
Wow. Thank you so much for that. Can you give an example of some of the supposed to be things that we might tell ourselves that can trip us up?
Sure. So, like one of the, this is actually a less like, what a lot of people will do, and I kind of touched on this before, is they will go into these online forums, on Facebook, you have a group and people, jump in there and say, I'm having this problem with my partner. How do I get them to see my perspective? And that right there is the beginning. Right? Okay. We do want our partners to understand us, but it's a very slippery slope because what these people usually mean is, how do I change my partner's mind or convince them of my point of view? And we come into these relationships sort of like looking and saying, oh, wow, this person, makes my bottom parts tingle and, I feel good around them. And when the parts that are not so smooth start popping up, right? Then we start wanting to sandpaper those off instead of saying, is this person a fit for me? We can still love them and say, this is not going to be a good fit. right? You know, it can be something as simple as, and this is not in your group, but in a monogamous group, advice group, somebody had posted about their partner loving photos of other women, particularly younger, attractive women on Instagram, and had asked him to stop and to unfriend these people. And he said, well, some of these people, like, these are actually my friends. Like, I have known these people through my life. Like, I've been to festivals with these people, whatever. And she said, I want you to stop. And he said, that is not an option. Right. And she gave him the silent treatment for the rest of the weekend. And then on Monday, he sent her a text and he said, I am sorry, this is not going to work for me. Right. Just, this is not how I think we want different things out of life. So she comes onto this group and it's like, how do I convince him that he is wrong for breaking up with me for over something as stupid and silly as that? Right. So like, listen to the way she's, you know, he's such a man child. How do I, you know, like convince him? And he's 15 years older than her, 12, 15. Anyway, a bit older, right? He's such a man child. How do I convince him he needs to take relationships seriously and that I really love him and that, you know, he needs to put effort into making this work? And, you know, I said, okay, you know, first of all, boundaries. He wants this. He has a right to this in his life. You can either accept that or not. If not, then it's time to leave, right? Like it's that simple. Either you accept what he wants for his life, for himself, or you leave because that's not a fit for your life. Also, do you hear how you're talking about it? Like, cause if you are saying this to a group of anonymous, you know, women online, then it's in your head. This is how you are thinking about your partner. You are talking contemptuously about somebody you're saying you want to build a life with. And I went back and forth with this person for, I don't know, 7 or 8 posts. And she could not get through her head that she could not change this person. Like she says, oh, I respect him. I would never say this to him. You right, saying it is not the problem. You thinking it is the problem, right? And so on top of that, in that same thread were a ton of people like, you don't want him. He's abusive, you know, liking and loving other women's stuff online. That is micro cheating. You know, like, he is going to cheat on you. You don't even want this relationship, you know, whatever. You need to tell him that that is micro cheating and he needs to learn to understand this and be a real man for it. I can't like, and I know how this feels because, you know, when I was in my relationships, how do I get him to open up to me more? How do I get him to talk to me more? How do I get him to stop doing this and to start doing that? How do I get him? How do I make him? How do I change him? How do I and that was normal, right? Like, this is what you think in relationships a lot of the time because this is how we're socialized to think. And it's wrong. It's like absolutely the opposite of what we want to do. What I suggest, and I wrote a big book about boundaries called Take No Shit. And it is, you know, how to set and maintain healthy boundaries in 3, sometimes 5 simple steps. And it's very simple to me. I break it down. 1, set your boundaries with yourself. 2, say your boundary. 3, review it. Did it work? Did it work for you? If the answer is yes, then check if it worked for your partner, right? If it did, then you're done. If it didn't work for whatever reason, they didn't stop, you had a big blowout, whatever. The next step is repeat it, have that discussion again, explain it a little bit more thoroughly, you know, and go into what I would consider, you know, enforcement or maintenance mode and give that however long. And then the 5th step is that if nothing changes or if it doesn't change enough or if you're not happy, then you change. You change what you're willing to accept. You change how you react to it. You change your relationship, right? It's that simple. It's the idea that we are autonomous individuals who are allowed to live our lives, and that if we are co-creating or collaborating on a relationship, then we should care about what the other person feels as well. Not that we must do what they say, right? There are going to be boundaries that are going to come up for me that are going to be incompatible with how my partner acts. And there's going to be conflict there, and we're going to have to get through it. But like, simple. I recently went through 4 major surgeries over the course of 9 months as a result of BRCA1 genetic mutation. If you know, you know, right? And when we were preparing for it, my partner and I were in the car and we were talking about something. I said, okay, so here's what I've got planned, you know, this, that, and the other thing. And during my convalescence, yada, yada, yada. And he's like, I don't like that word. What word? Convalescence? He's like, yeah. He's like, it sounds like old people and dying. And I'm like, okay, what word would you rather me use? Like recovery? He's like, yeah. I'm like, okay. Right? That simple, right? I don't need to convince him that the word doesn't necessarily mean that. I don't need to convince him that it's my right to use whatever word I want to use, right? We're in a relationship. I don't want him to think about death and dying when he thinks about me. I don't want to harm him. I don't want him to worry more about something that's already going to be pretty stressful, like major surgeries, right? Like I don't want any of that. I want him to feel comfortable and safe with me. Now, is that a big boundary? No. Right? Like it would not have ruined our relationship for me to say, that's kind of silly. Let's just move past that, right? Like it would not have harmed us over time. It would not have ended us. It would not. But why? Like, why wouldn't I want him to feel good and positive in speaking up and saying, you know, I don't really like that word. And if anybody thinks that's silly, just think about, and because we all have this at least once in your past when you've been called a nickname that you hated, right? Feel that. That is like in our local community, our local kink community, we call these micro consents, right? Micro boundaries. And it's very much, if you speak, I listen. I don't have to do what you say. You don't have to do what I say. But in the scheme of building a life together, if we build the best life possible for us as individuals and co-create our relationship and put only the things into that relationship, that togetherness that we both want, then the things that I don't want, like mountain biking, can go into his individual stack. Right. And he makes the time and does that. And I go, you ride strong today. Woohoo. Right. And I do my own thing, like hanging out at home with the cat and writing a book or whatever it is. Right. So that's a big one. You know, just the idea that we have been taught that our best bet is to get into some sort of relationship, any sort of relationship, and then make the other person what we want and also conform to what they want, you know. And I actually just released a book, March 1st, People Pleaser No More, that is all about how we like conform ourselves to what we think others want from us, whether that's accurate or not, right? Because who hasn't been in a relationship that started out amazing and then you got a ways into it and you're like, you're not who I was in love with at the beginning. And they're like, but I changed to be what you wanted. And you're like, no, but you might have complained about a lot of that stuff, but a lot of that stuff is what made it interesting to begin with. Right. So yeah. How do we, that's my big thing. How do we as individuals show up authentically and radically ourselves with our boundaries and our love and our communication, and also co-create and collaborate on lives together?
Love that. Love that. Well, I could just talk to you all day, Heather. This has been an amazing, amazing conversation. And I have a feeling we'll be speaking again in the future. But I want to be respectful of your time too. So you mentioned a couple books. So the Take No Shit book, which I definitely will be getting a copy of. People Pleaser No More. What are some
Yeah.
other books that you'd like to share with our audience?
So I've got Start with No out. That one's specifically for dating, about setting boundaries early and often in dating so that you find out if somebody's not going to like respect your boundaries fast, right? I've got one coming out April 2nd. I didn't want to put it out on April 1st because, well, April 1st.
Yeah, exactly.
And it's called Fight Less, Love More. Nice. And that one is specifically about, techniques to obviously fight less and be more loving in your relationships. I'm working on a breakup book. I'm working on a book and workshop. So that's like a 30-day plan for building better emotional boundaries. And then I've got a bunch of books that are available primarily to the alternative lifestyle market, like specifically through kink. So I've got It's Not Cheating, which I'll probably end up updating and releasing more widely. It's not cheating. It's ethical and consensual non-monogamy, right? Like, so focusing in on, how this isn't cheating. Things about kink, things about femdom, and so on and so forth. But the easy ones to get are the ones that you're going to find by, like, if you go to Take No Shit on Amazon and follow me as an author, you'll be notified whenever I have a new one coming out.
That's amazing. It sounds like you're a very prolific writer. You're writing like a book a year?
Well, so no, I used to write every single day. I used to write and produce a podcast episode every single weekday.
Wow.
For years. And for most of my adult life, I have been writing and educated in one way or another. Even when I was in the corporate world, I was writing and educating how to do customer service and so on and so forth for kinkos. So I write a lot, right? Like this is, and so, when I went through these surgeries, I sort of paused for a while and I focused on this one big book, Take No Shit. And then I realized that if I averaged out how much I was writing when I was just doing a blog post and a podcast every day and what effort I was putting in, and I put that effort into books, I was writing around 15,000 words every 2 weeks. So wow. I could just sort of move that over into like these books, focusing in on one specific topic, dial it, like Start with No, I think is like 12,000 words. It's like not big, but it's one specific thing. Get in there, understand this. Your dating will be infinitely better. Like there's no fluff added to that book at all. People Pleaser No More. Get in here, understand yourself, understand where it comes from. Here's how to stop it, right? Done. It is not like Take No Shit is like deep and it goes through everything. It's 78,000 words or something. Wow. It's big, right? These are more like, getting up on a soapbox and saying, here is one skill that can make your life better, right? Fight Less, Love More will probably end up being around 25,000 words. That's because I'm digging into like all the different types of fighting that we do and so on and so forth. But yeah, so I'm guessing, more like a book every month or so for this year.
It's amazing.
Because I've already written most of this, right? I'm compiling it. I'm connecting the dots. I'm making this accessible for people in a way that it's never been before.
Amazing. Well, I totally love the conversation, and all these books can be found on Amazon and where else can people find you and your work?
my.curiouser.life.
Nice. Okay. Well, awesome. Well, Heather, thank you so much. This has been absolutely fascinating conversation. Your journey, your life is just magical and amazing. And I hope to meet you in person someday.
Absolutely.
We're not that far.
Yeah. And thank you so much for having me. I mean, it's always a joy if I have the opportunity to give, just one person out there going through any of what I went through, the hope that on the other side, there is better. There is like beyond your wildest imagination better. It is there for you. And even if you're just kind of going through relationship detritus, right? Like there's better for that too. You can, your expectations are probably not unreasonable. Your tools to make those expectations happen are probably dull or the wrong ones entirely.
Mm-hmm. Wow. Yeah. Well, I'm so excited to hear about all your books and the fact that you continue to write so much for our beloved community. So thank you for that. And it's just been an absolute pleasure getting to know you so far.
Thank you.
Thanks for tuning in to today's show. If you like what you heard, are struggling with some aspect of your relationships, and you're interested in seeing if you're a fit to work with me as your relationship coach, here's what I invite you to do next. Head over to lovingwithoutboundaries.com/apply. That's lovingwithoutboundaries.com/apply, and book a call to speak with me. I'll get on the phone with you for about 45 minutes, and we'll get you crystal clear on 3 things. Number 1, exactly what's not working well in your relationships right now. Number 2, ideally where you'd like to be and what might be getting in the way. And number 3, the exact strategy to get you there, helping to close that gap. Remember, creating healthy, open relationships does not typically happen by itself. Many often need expert guidance to make it happen. We've helped clients all over the world to feel safe, happy, and secure in open relationships while not losing their mind or their cherished partners. To see if we can help you do the same, head over to lovingwithoutboundaries.com/apply. I'm Kitty Chambliss, and let's talk soon.